Hey guys, my name is Sky and I'm a tutor from Alpha One Coaching College. Today we'll be reviewing the reading comprehension section of the Selective High School Placement Test. In this video, we'll be reading through the extracts together as well as analysing them and going through the questions. I'll also be giving you guys some tips and tricks that you guys can use as well as some techniques that you can implement for you to improve in the future. So let's begin. So in this first section of our reading comprehension, we are to read two extracts on the theme of dogs and the relationship with humans, and then we are going to go through the questions together. So let's have a look at text A from The Call of the Wild by Jack London. Buck the dog enjoys his new freedom after being rescued by John Thornton, a kind new master, having pulled a sled for thousands of miles. Lying by the riverbank through the long spring days, watching the running water, listening to the songs of birds and the hum of nature, Buck slowly won back his strength. It must be confessed that Buck waxed lazy as his wounds healed. His muscles swelled out, and the flesh came back to cover his bones. For that matter, they were all loafing, Buck, John Thornton, and Skeet, waiting for the raft to come that was to carry them down to Dawson. Skeet was a little Irish setter who early made friends with Buck, who, in a dying condition, was unable to resent her first advances. She had the doctor trait, which some dogs possess, washing and cleansing Buck's wounds regularly each morning after he had finished his breakfast. She performed the self-appointed task, till he came to look for her ministrations as much as he did for Thornton's. To Buck's surprise, Skeet manifested no jealousy towards him. She seemed to share the kindliness and largeness of John Thornton. As Buck grew stronger, she enticed him into all sorts of ridiculous games, in which Thornton himself could not but forbear to join. And in this fashion, Buck romped through his convalescence and into a new existence. Thornton was the ideal master. He never forgot a kindly greeting or a cheering word, and to sit down for a long talk with them was as much his delight as theirs. He had a way of taking Buck's head roughly between his hands and resting his own head upon Buck's, the while calling him names that to Buck were love names. Buck knew no greater joy than that rough embrace and the sound of murmured oaths. With his mouth laughing, his eyes eloquent, his throat vibrant with unuttered sounds, John Thornton would reverently claim, God, he can all but speak. Buck had a trick of love expressions that was akin to hurt. He would often seize Thornton's hands in his mouth and close so fiercely that the flesh bore impress of his teeth for some time afterwards. And Buck understood the oaths to be love words, so the man understood these fine bites for caress. For the most part, however, Buck's love was expressed in adoration. While he went wild with happiness when Thornton touched him or spoke to him, he did not seek these tokens. Unlike Skeet, who was wont to shove a nose under Thornton's hand and nudged until petted, Buck was content to adore at a distance. He would lie by the hour, eager, alert, at Thornton's feet, looking up to his face, studying it, following with keenest interest, with fleeting expression, every movement or change of feature. For a long time after his rescue, Buck did not like Thornton to get out of his sight. From the moment he left the tent to when he entered it again, Buck would follow at his heels. His transient masters, since he had come to Northland, had bred him in a fear that no master could be permanent. Even in the night in his dream, he was haunted by this fear. So we can see in this passage that it is written in third person, but we do see a close, intimate perspective of Buck, who is a dog. We see his relationship with Thornton and another dog called Skeet, and even though his life seems great throughout the passage, things do seem to take a turn at the end, as we can see that he does fear that his master could leave at any moment. And we can see that this would be, this is something that happened in the past. His masters could have probably left him, and he fears that no master is permanent. So let's have a look at the passages carefully, paragraph by paragraph. We won't take too long doing this, but I do want to make sure you guys understand everything. All right, starting with this, the beginning, they do give us an introduction that he was rescued by John Thornton, who seems to be kind, and this is after he had pulled sleds for thousands of miles. We can also see that in the first paragraph, his life is great. He's living by the river, enjoying nature, the songs of birds and the hum of nature, and he slowly won back his strength. This indicates that he had been hurt prior, or he's injured. Right. You can also see that he had confessed, it must be confessed that Buck waxed lazy, which just means that he had just become lazy. But that's obviously because he was injured and as his wounds healed. For that matter, they were all loafing. And loafing just means that they are avoiding any activity. So it seems like they were all being lazy together, or not doing anything together. And they introduce Skeet to us in the second half of the paragraph, who is a little Irish setter, so another dog that Thornton seems to own. And she seems to have a doctor trait, which means, she's cleansing and washing Buck's wounds regularly, and she seems to have made it her self-appointed task, which means, she had kind of decided that she needs to do it on her, on her own will. We can see that it says, to Buck's surprise, Skeet manifested no jealousy towards him. This is quite interesting because dogs do get quite jealous if another dog comes into their own family. But seeing this kind of shows us that Skeet is quite caring and feels genuine about Buck. So this paragraph is just showing us the relationship with Buck and Skeet. So from Buck's perspective. We can see at the end of the paragraph, there's a word called convalescence. This just basically means it's a recovery. All right, moving on to the next paragraph, we can see that it's just the relationship he has about Thornton. So this is just about Thornton and how he shows lots of affection and lots of love towards Buck, which is quite nice to see. And the next paragraph is showing us how, and kind of specifying how Buck showed his love, which seems to be quite similar. It can just mean similar to hurt. So he would bite Thornton's hand, as we can see, so fiercely that the flesh would leave marks of his teeth. So we can see this is quite rough, but the man, which is Thornton, did seem to understand this as caress, which just means his way of showing that he cares. And following to the last paragraph, we can see that his love was expressed in adoration. If you guys already know this, that's okay, but this just means with deep love and respect. And we can see that at the end of the paragraph, unlike Skeet, so Skeet seems to seek attention from Thornton all the time. She's nudging his hand until she's petted. However, we can see Buck seems to, adore at a distance, and he just study his face and just appreciate that Thornton is there. So we can see that the first, basically majority of the passage is showing us that Buck is loving his life and he's having such a great time with Skeet and his new owner Thornton. However, we can see at the end of the passage, like I talked about before, he fears that he will that no master could be permanent, which provokes quite a bit of sympathy and empathy from us readers, because if you guys think about it, if someone is bragging about their life, telling you how great it is, and at the end kind of worrying, telling you that they worry that this won't be permanent, you would feel quite sorry for him or sorry for them. So this is what we're kind of seeing here. So it, provokes a sense of empathy. Readers. All right, so moving on to text B. Before we start reading, I want you guys to keep in mind that the two extracts that we're reading are on the theme of dogs and the relationships of humans. Just keeping that in mind before we read. Could be great. So let's have a read. This is From the Effects of Pets on Humans by Mary Carter. Anyone who has ever owned a pet knows you have the capacity for the kind of unconditional love that is seen otherwise only between a human and its offspring. The gentle nudge of a wet nose or a lick on the hand comes unbidden when we're upset or feeling down. The bounding dash to the door to greet us is also a demonstrable sign of the strength of the human-canine bond in particular. Dogs can be trained to recognize words through commands. Scientists agree that they can't actually understand the words. What they hear is the emotion of the voice. Studies have also shown that looking a dog in the eye can boost levels of oxytocin, a hormone involved in social bonding in both the person and the dog. From the dog's perspective, it's not just cupboard love triggered by a hungry belly. There is in fact nothing artificial that could ever replace that sheer authenticity of feeling. Dogs are the only species that, like a human child, would run to their human when frightened, anxious, or just pleased to see them. They are also the only animal, aside from other humans, that actively seek out eye contact with people and truly want to be with us. Cats, too, come to us when we're feeling down and will show they actually are pleased to see us with a lick on the hand or a gentle purr to express their own feelings of contentment. Pets give people so much in terms of love and emotional support. Simply stroking a dog, for example, can lead to lower blood pressure and can combat stress. The feelings are reciprocated as our touch can have therapeutic effects for our pets, particularly if we are feeling out of sorts. Okay, so the second extract is an informative text of the effects of pets on humans. So this text tells us quite a lot about how dogs could, what effects dogs have on humans. There's the psychological and the physical effects, as well as a bit of information on cats as well. We can see that in this extract, they tell us that the relationship that pets have with humans are otherwise only seen between human and its offspring, which just basically means is their children, right? And the strength of the human canine behavior just means dogs, or relating to dogs. In the second passage, the paragraph, they tell us that dogs can't be trained to understand the words, rather they just understand the emotions of the voice. Moving on, we can see that the third paragraph tells us that looking in a dog's eyes just boosts levels of oxytocin, which is a hormone relating to social bonding for both the person and the dog. And it's telling us that there is, in fact, nothing artificial that could replace the sheer authenticity, which just means the genuine feeling that they give. And they also tell us that dogs are the only species, like a human child, that will run to humans when frightened. They also move on in the fourth paragraph to tell us the relationship between cats and humans. Even though cats could seem quite feisty, they do come to us when we're feeling down, and they do show that they are pleased to see us with gentle lick on the hand or a purr to show feelings of contentment. And contentment just means satisfaction. And they wrap up just to say that pets give lots of emotional support and love for people. All right, so having read these two passages, we can see that the second passage is quite an informative text, like I said earlier, with no perspective from anyone, rather just pure facts and a little bit of emotion relating to it. But like I said before, there is no perspective. However, we can see in the previous text, like we read, it is from the perspective of Buck, and this really shows us an insight on how dogs could feel when they have a relationship with humans. All right, so having read these two, let's have a look at the questions. Okay, so let's have a look at question 1. What theme is dealt with in both extracts? So in this, we're talking about what theme or what main idea is dealt with in both extracts. So with these questions, I want to make sure that the theme is explored in both A and B. So having a look at option A, it says the owner sensing that the dog is ill at ease. So we know that in extract A, this was kind of explored because we do know that Buck was ill, but it wasn't the main theme or a big theme that was shown. But because it was mentioned, we'll just tick A and B. We can see that there was nothing sensing that the dog is ill at ease. It was rather an informative text, showing us the affection and the relationships that dogs have with humans. So we know B would not be our answer. Sorry, B didn't explore this theme, so we know A is not our answer. B, the mutual affection between dog and human. We know that in A, there was mutual affection. Mutual just means it is shown in both parties, or it's just two or more parties, but in this particular case, is it shown in both a dog and a human? Yes, we do know that it is, because we do see a relationship between Buck and Thornton, so we know it is explored in A. And B also covers this topic as well, because B does talk about how there is a relationship between a dog and a human that goes both ways. So we can see B is our answer. But let's just make sure, let's just double check that C and D is not our answers by going through them as well. C, the jealousy dogs have of each other and other pets. We know that in A, it particularly mentioned that dogs, it's talking about dogs and other pets. We do know that Skeet showed, if you guys remember, Skeet showed no jealousy towards him, which means C is just incorrect for extract A. And for B, we didn't see anything to do with jealousy in this particular extract, so we know C is not our answer either. And D, the dog trying to warn its owner about something. You know that in A, that wasn't really mentioned, as well as B. So there was nothing to do with the dog trying to warn its owner about anything. So we can just confirm that B was our answer. Cool. Moving on to question 2. What idea about dog behavior is present in text B is also in text A. So we wanted to see something that was in text B and mentioned in text A. So let's have a look at all the options. A, the way a dog communicates its support in a physical way. So if you guys remember in text B, Buck showed his support by, playfully fighting. Playfully fighting with Thornton. And we do know that so we know it was in A and B. Sorry, it was in B and A. A dog would communicate its support in a physical way by, greeting the humans at the door. So that is just an example. So that's why A would be our answer, because this dog behavior was present in both these extracts. But let's just make sure B, C, and D is not our answer as well. By looking at B, let's have a look. The pleasure of a dog on its owner's return. We know that in B, there was nothing to do with nothing showing how a dog feels happy when the owner is returned, even though it was mentioned in A, the fact that they come and greet humans at the door. Because it wasn't mentioned in B, we know that option B is not our answer. C, the beneficial effects of a dog on its owner's health. We know that in extract B, there was a beneficial effect on the owner's health on the dog, right? Because it was shown, we could see that Buck felt very calm and he was kind of living his best life thanks to his owner, but it didn't go the other way. So we know that it wasn't mentioned in B, although it was mentioned in A. The benefit of looking at a dog in the eye creates, can or stroking a dog can lead to low blood pressure and combat stress. Even though this is to do with the owner's health, because it wasn't mentioned in text B, we know that C isn't our answer. And option D, the way a dog may seek its owner's protection. We know that we did kind of see it in text B in the sense that the dog was, sitting, or Buck was sitting at Thornton's feet and kind of looking at every movement and change of feature, probably to protect him. We didn't really see both in we didn't really see it in A. Also, we can't really confirm that we saw this in B, although I would say we saw that the dog may seek its owner's protection because when they're scared, they would run to their owners. We would kind of confirm. And option B, the way a dog may seek its owner's protection. We didn't really see that in extract B because Buck wasn't in any sort of danger. However, we did see it in A, how a dog would run to its owners when they're feeling frightened, anxious, or just pleased to see them. But because it wasn't mentioned in extract B, we can confirm that D is not our answer and A is our best answer. So moving on to question 3, what idea about communication is present in both extracts? So like the first 2 questions, we're looking for communication or an idea of communication mentioned in both extracts A and B. So let's have a look at the options. A, humans sometimes call dog names that they regret. We do know that we saw that Thornton would call Buck names, but it wasn't something that he regretted, or there was nothing to kind of hint that. So we know that wasn't in B, and there was nothing like that shown in A as well. So we know A is not our answer. B, dogs recognize the feelings behind owners' words. We do see that this was shown in both A and B, right? Because in extract A, the dog Buck would look for the feeling that Thornton would have. If you guys have a look at this section here, a kindly greeting or a chewing word. This does both show a bit of emotions in their words. So we know it was mentioned in text A, and in text B, if you guys remember, towards the middle, or the beginning, they hear the emotions of the voice and that they don't actually recognize words through commands. So that those 2 extracts both explored this theme, this idea of communication, that dogs recognize the feelings behind their owner's words. So we can confirm B is our answer. Cool. But let's just make sure, like we did before, that C and D isn't our best answers. So C, dogs occasionally find it hard to hide their aggressive instincts. We know that in A, it was shown because Buck would play fight Thornton, and it would leave marks on his skin. Right, where is it? Yeah. So it would leave impressions of his teeth, but it wasn't shown in extract B. This idea wasn't explored in extract B, so we know that C is not our answer. And D, humans are amazed at how many orders a dog can follow. So in A, it did show, that Thornton was amazed, because if you guys remember the section where it says, if you remember, it says, God, you can all but speak, which just basically means, well, you can do everything but speak. So it does see, we can see that Thornton was amazed at how many orders Buck could follow, but that wasn't really mentioned in B. So we can confirm that option B is our best answer. Moving on to question 4, the phrase "for that matter" in text A is used to. So if you guys look back to, if you guys remember text A, where it says "for that matter," before that they were talking about how Buck waxed lazy. And it just means Buck became lazy as his wounds healed, his muscles swelled out, and the flesh came back to cover his bones. For that matter, they were all loafing, Buck, John Thornton, and Skeet, waiting for the raft to come that was to carry them down to Dawson. So we know that "for that matter" is kind of, it's not really showing any contrast, rather kind of intensifying or this particular situation, that seems to be a little bit negative, right? Because we know that loafing or not doing anything is usually not a great thing to do, and the author doesn't seem to be quite impressed at that. So let's have a look at the options. So A, introduce a contrast. So we know that contrast means introduce like differences. Well, we know that the sentence before and the sentence after were both talking about the fact that they weren't doing anything. So we know that A is not answer because there are no differences. It's rather talking about the same thing. B, intensify a positive description. So even though it is kind of intensifying a particular thing or, explaining further, it's not really a positive description. So we know that B is not answer, but it could be. So let's just give it a little question mark and make sure that we don't have any better answers that could be the best answer or the better answer. C, widen out a criticism. So this would be our answer because, like we talked about before, criticism just means disapproving. So disapproving a particular behavior, which is, disapproving of loafing, right? Or disapproving of not doing anything. So we can confirm C is our best answer, and it's better than B. And lastly, D, give a reason for particular behavior. So there was no reason that was given out. It was rather just explaining further what they were doing. So we can confirm C is our best answer. So moving on to question 5. In text A, what are we taught about Buck and the female dog Skeet? So in text A, we did see that Skeet showed lots of affection towards Buck, and she had doctor traits that involved her licking wounds and etc. So if we have a look at all the options, A, Skeet was initially wary of approaching Buck. Wary means you're just careful about something, but we can see that from the beginning, Skeet wasn't, Skeet seemed quite welcoming to Buck, and that's why we can see A was not our answer. B, Buck was initially irritated by Skeet. We didn't see any sign of irritation. Irritation just means annoyed. And we can see that Buck wasn't irritated at all or annoyed at all by Skeet. So B is not our answer. And C, Buck eventually appreciated Skeet's affection. I would say this is our best answer because even though it doesn't explicitly say Buck appreciated Skeet's affection, it was rather that Buck just let her do a thing, and then he was just growing comfortable and appreciative of Skeet's affection. And we can just through the process of elimination, we know that C would be our best answer because D, Skeet eventually I would say that means Skeet eventually got tired of Buck. We know that's not true because Skeet and Buck, both lived very, very happily with Thornton. So we can confirm C is our best answer. And question 6, in comparison with Skeet, the expression of Buck's love for Thornton was, so we're talking about in comparison to Skeet's. So if you guys remember the passage, in particular, we're talking about it in this extract right here, in this paragraph right here. We know that Buck's love was expressed in adoration, and he went wild with the happiness when Thornton touched him or spoke to him, but he did not seek these tokens. Did not seek these tokens just means, tokens is just something great that's happening. And he didn't really go out look for it. Rather, Skeet was the one that would always, nudge until petted, which just means she was always seeking for Thornton's attention. So this is the paragraph that we can find our answer. So we know that Skeet was just needed more attention, seeking, and Buck was just doing his thing, right? Not seeking more attention. So if we move down, we know that move down the options. We know that A, more impulsive, is not correct. It was nothing to do with impulsiveness, which is just acting. So impulsive just means doing things quite spontaneously or not really thinking before acting. We know that wasn't shown, so A is not correct. B, less complicated. There was nothing to hint that anything was less complicated, so we know B is not our answer. C, more erratic. Erratic just means unpredictable. I guess that's quite similar to impulsive, but just in the case, in the context that it's just, you won't know what she's going to do next, but we know that wasn't correct because there was nothing to show that, to hint that. And D, less needy would be correct, right? Because like we talked about earlier, Buck wasn't seeking for any attention, or he didn't go out to ask for these tokens, but Skeet would always nudge until she was petted. So obviously we can see that she was more needy, and D would be our answer. Cool. Moving on to the last two questions. Question 7, according to the last paragraph, Buck was haunted by the thought that. So if you guys remember the last paragraph, we were talking about how it created a bit of a contrast from the rest of the paragraphs, right? Because remember, throughout the passage, we were talking about how Buck was living such a great life, but at the end, it was, provoking empathy from the readers because he was fearing that no master could be permanent, which means he was just scared that Thornton could leave him at any moment. So this was the fear, or the thought that was haunting Buck in the last paragraph. So haunting just means you're just scared, right? That something was going to happen, right? And coming back, all the time. That said it was haunting in his dreams as well. So let's have a look. A, his captors would return to claim him. There was nothing to do with his captors coming back, right? Or there was nothing hinting that there were captors. So A is not correct. B, he might never see the wild again. We know that this wasn't shown either. Even though we did see a lot about the wild, he wasn't haunted by this thought in the last paragraph. C, he would lose his way in this new land. Like we said before, this also isn't relevant. And D, his present owner would disappear from his life, would be correct. So D is our best answer. So if you guys remember, like we talked about earlier, the last paragraph was just haunting him at the thought that no master is permanent. And that would just always scare him. And this is probably because of the fact that his previous owners probably could have left him, and he's just quite traumatized from those experiences. And lastly, question 8, what does the writer of text B say about the stare of a dog gives its owner? So lastly, question 8, what does the writer of text B say about the stare a dog gives its owner? So we know that this particular section was was shown in paragraph 3, where they were talking about how studies have shown that looking at a dog in the eye can boost levels of oxytocin in both the person and the dog. And from the dog's perspective, it is not just cupboard love. And cupboard love actually just means it's like affection and love given to obtain something. And we can see that in this paragraph, they're saying that it is not just cupboard love triggered by a hungry belly. So it means they are not just giving you love for treats, rather that it's quite genuine and authentic, right? So if we go back to this, to the options, we can see, have a look at A, it is entirely genuine and earnest, would be correct, right? Because we know that it is not food driven, it was quite authentic. That's the word they used in the passage. And earnest, both means quite authentic and sincere, right? And B, let's have a look at B as well, just to make sure B, it is something that parents will understand. We know that even though they were talking about a human and its offspring, and that the relationship between a pet and a dog, pet and a human is resembling of that relationship, it wasn't talking about the step, right? So we know B is not correct. C, it is motivated by the desire for food. We just talked about the fact that it was not cupboard love, and it was rather the opposite. So we know that this is definitely incorrect. And lastly, D, it is shared in the animal kingdom only by cats. You know that this was just showing us the fact that cats do come to us when we're feeling down, and they do show us a bit of affection, and it wasn't to do with the stare that a dog gives its owner. So that's why we can confirm that option A is correct. So you guys would have probably realized that a lot of these options do seem quite true in certain texts, regarding certain texts. But what is important is that we read the question carefully and look at the keyword that they're asking us in order for us to answer the question well. So now that we're finished, let's just move on to the poem that we're having a look at. Okay, so the next section of our reading comprehension refers to the poem From the Wave by Tom Gunn. Although we weren't able to see the poem on the actual paper, the reading paper that had been given to us, I was able to find it online, and you can too by just searching the title, and you will just be able to find it on Google and read it for yourselves as well. Okay, so let's have a read of this together, and then we'll move on to analyzing this stanza by stanza and talking about it a little bit as well, seeing what the poet actually meant and talking about it, and then we'll move on to answer the questions together. All right, so we'll have a read of From the Wave by Tom Gunn. It mounts at sea a concave wall, down rivers shine, and pushes forward, building tall, its steep incline. Then from their hiding rise to sight black shapes on boards, bearing before the fringe of white, it models towards. The pale feet curl, they poise their weight with learned skill. It is the wave they imitate, keeps them so still. The marbling bodies have become half wave, half men, grafted it seems by the feet of foam. Some seconds then, as late as they can, they slice the face in time procession. Balance is triumph in this place, triumph possession. The mindless heave of which they rode, a fluid shelf, breaks as they leave it, slows, falls and slowed, loses itself. Clear the sheathed bodies, sleeker seals, loosen and tingle, and by the board the barefoot feels the shock of shingle. They paddle in the shallow still, two splash each other, then all swim out to wait until the right waves gather. All right, so this poem is particularly long, not too long, but we can see that this poem is talking to us about surface, right? And it's also exploring the ideas of nature and how the surface kind of interact with that the idea of nature as well. All right, so because this poem was a little bit long and a bit hard to understand at the start, let's go through it stanza by stanza and really explore what the poet meant. All right, so before we begin, we want to look at the title. So it says From the Wave. So while we've analyzed this poem, I want you guys to think about what is from the wave. All right, so let's have a look at this this poem, stanza by stanza. But before we begin, stanza means group of lines in poems. And you can just think about it as paragraphs as well. But we don't actually use the word paragraphs when we're referring to groups of lines in poems, and rather we use the word stanzas. All right, so having a look at the first stanza, and the first sentence of it, it says it mounts at sea. So we want to talk about what does mount mean? No, mount just means you are climbing. And in a sporting sense, we're talking about climbing or ascending. And we're probably talking about the fact that how surface climbing and ascending the waves, right? Think about it like that. At sea, a concave wall. If you guys think of a wave, I'm actually terrible at drawing, but you can think about a wave being concaved in like that, right? So this is kind of the imagery that the poet is trying to show, right? How the surfers are climbing this concave wall, which are waves. Moving on, it says down ribbed with shine. Likely to do with the fact that surfaces are wet because they've been in the water. It pushes towards building tall, it's steep incline. So this particular line, building tall, probably talking about how tall the wave is, right? So at the beginning, we're just introducing the surface and the wave, seeing what we kind of giving us a bit of an idea on what we should be imagining. The second stanza says, then from their hiding, rise to sight. So it says hiding and rising to sight, which means before you couldn't see it and now you can. So this could be interpreting both the wave and the surface, right? Could interpret as both the wave and the surface, right? Because we couldn't see it before, but now we are able to see the waves and the surface, right? We can think about it in both ways. And it says black shapes on boards, bearing before fringe of white, it models towards. So models basically just means it's like when you can't see color regularly. So this is when color is arranged irregularly. And this is probably talking about the color amongst the sea, right? About how the surfaces are probably colorful and have contrasting colors to the actual waves itself. And you guys can probably imagine if you see surface in the water, they are arranged quite irregularly. So we don't see clear colors, but then we just see little if you're looking at it from far away, we see like dots of people, right? And this is probably what the poet is trying to portray. Moving on to the next stanza, it says the pale feet curl, they poise their weight. So their pale feet, talking about their feet on the surfboards, right? Right here on surfboards. They poise their weight, and it says with learned skill, there's a wave they imitate, keeps them so still. So this stanza is particularly talking about how surfers move with skill, right? Because obviously surfing is not meant for everyone, and this stanza is really showing how they are curling their feet and poising their weight, means balancing their weight with learned skill, and it's a wave they imitate. And this is really showing how they move smoothly with the wave. And next stanza says, the marbling bodies have become half wave, half men. So marbling, likely because they're wet, right? And half wave, half men. If you guys would think about it, I would think that this is a metaphor of mermaids, right? Or mermen, right? If it's half wave, half men, it is kind of hinting at the fact that we are looking at mermaids, and mermaids are just very graceful on the sea, and they can swim very well. That is probably what the poet is trying to portray. It says grafted it scenes by the feet of foam. Feet of foam, probably talking about the water, right? When water get all foamy while there are waves. And grafted just means it's attached. This likely means it is attached to the feet of water. So the surfers are balanced very well and moving along with the water as well. So some seconds then, so we're looking to see what's going to happen. Late as they can, they slice the face. So like they're probably talking about how they're slicing the face of water. Right? When surfers slice the face of water, they're just surfing gracefully. In timed procession, procession just means like a machine which is probably talking about how they are very precise and with precision. So they're moving with precision. Balance is triumph in this place. Triumph, possession. Triumph means great success. So what this likely means is, they slice the face of the water in time possession like a machine, with precise acts. And they're also talking about the fact that balance is triumph. So balance is great importance. I would say that is probably the better way to describe this. Great importance. In this place, triumph possession. So that's what we're looking at here. So mindless heave of which they rode. So heave just means to like rise and fall rhythmically. And the fact that they're saying mindless just means it's, without effort, right? So it's probably suggesting that the surfers are rising and falling rhythmically without any effort, and they're just riding the waves naturally. It just seems like second nature to them, right? A fluid shelf, and a fluid shelf is just talking about the water, right? The water. Breaks as they leave it, slow, falls, slow, loses itself. So like we talked about before, this is talking about the wave, how they're breaking the wave, or like we talked about earlier, they're slicing the face of the water and it's just leaving and falls and slowing. Clear the sheet bodies, sleek as seals. Okay, so sleek as seals. So they're just they're comparing the surface to seals, right? Which are animals that live in water. Loosen and tingle. By the board, the barefoot feels. Because they're obviously in barefoot. The shock of shingle. So this stanza in particular. So shingle just is small, round pebbles, and this is likely to be a metaphor, because we're not really talking about pebbles in this case. So this whole stanza is just talking and explaining, letting the readers imagine what the surface look like. So they're just sleek as seals, with the bare foot and a shock of shingle. So they're comparing the surface with objects that are very smooth, I guess, with pebbles as well, which is a metaphor in this case. And lastly, the stanza is talking about, says they paddle in the shallow still to splash each other, then all swim out to wait until the right waves gather. So this is quite interesting because throughout the whole passage, we're seeing lots of metaphors and lots of symbolism on surface and waves to things that aren't usually compared, right? But in the last stanza, it kind of wraps up by showing actual behaviors of people, right? So people paddling, to splash each other and swim out. And these are all behaviors of people, right? And it says right waves gather. And we can see, if you guys also feel this way, it feels quite liberating to me reading this last stanza, because the last stanza is just saying things that are quite normal and real to people, right? So I would say the last stanza, like we said, is quite liberating because throughout the whole passage we're seeing lots of symbolism, lots of metaphors about surface and comparing things to surface that aren't normally compared. And then the last little section is talking about quite literally behaviors of humans that are usually seen normally. All right. So let me just annotate this little bit as well. So the second last stanza was talking about how the surface looked. And the last section is just quite describing real human behaviors. All right. Now that we've analyzed this poem together, let's have a look at the questions. Hopefully you guys are able to understand this passage a little bit better as well. So if we are trying to kind of summarize what happens, we're just seeing surfers and their behaviors in the water and how they surf so gracefully. Right, so having a look at the questions. So question 9 says the idea in the title of the poem is developed by the description of, what? The title was From the Wave. And like we talked about before, we want to discuss what is from the wave. And, throughout the passage, we know that, what was from the wave? It was probably the surface, right? And on how the surface throughout the poem, start off by, climbing the walls, and we don't really see much of the surface at the beginning. Rather, the poet is trying to slowly introduce the surface on how they are appearing in the waves, right, throughout the descriptions. So let's have a look at the options. So A, the growing size of the wave. So we know that it's not the growing size of the wave, right? B, the surface first appearance. So this is what we just talked about, right? How the surface slowly begin to come out throughout the passage and throughout the poem. So we know B is correct, but let's just make sure C and D aren't correct by double checking. So C, the waves are advancing. So like we talked about before, this isn't, we can't really say the waves are from the wave, right? That's not really the idea that is developed by the description. Developed, right? So we know C is not correct. And D, the surface distance from the shore. Even though this is also mentioning the surface, it's not really to do with the distance from the shore, rather how the surfers are first appearing from the wave, right? That is the idea that it's trying to develop. So we can confirm B is our answer. Question 10, in the poem, the description of the surface shift says from what, right? Description of the surface. So we know that at the beginning, it kind of slowly, it talks about how they are balancing, right? It says keeps them so still. Just highlight. Keeps them so still. 2, and mounting at sea, right? This is how the surfers are started as described. And then it just moves on. And then it just moves on to how they are slicing the face of the waves. Also, with triumph, which is great importance, and it's trying to amplify how they are acting in movements, right? With lots of movement. So if we have a look at the questions, so A, from a sense of collaboration to one's self-reliance, I would say it's quite the opposite to this, because at the start we are given self-reliance on how they balance on their feet so well individually, and then at the end it would rather be, it would be collaboration, how they paddle to splash together, they all swim out, right? So A would actually be just quite opposite. So we know A is not correct. And B, from a feeling of apprehension to one's achievement. So we know apprehension just means to worry. And we can't really see any worrying of one's achievement in this passage, in this poem, so we know B is not correct, which is irrelevant, right? C, from an impression of immobility to one's rapid movement. Immobility just means unable to move, right? Unable to move. And to one of rapid movement. So like we talked about before, this is probably likely the case, because at the start we see, like we highlighted, it mounts at sea and it's climbing, it's not really moving as much. And it's also keeping them so still. And it moves on to talk about how they slice the face, it is triumph. And that's why we can see that C would be a great answer. But let's just double check D as well to make sure we have chosen our best answer. D, from a state of relaxed indifference to one of active participation. So indifferent just means, just do it again. Indifferent just means not minding, right? So if you're indifferent towards something, you just don't really care about something, right? So it says from a state of relaxed indifference to active participation. We don't really see much of indifference and active participation. It's rather C would be the best description, in which there is lots of rapid movement and things like that. So we can confirm. C is our answer. Question 11. The word grafted in the fourth verse suggests that the surfers are what? So if we go back to the passage, grafted in the fourth verse, we can see right here, right? We can see grafted. It says grafted it seems by the feet of foam, and prior to that it says half wave, half men, grafted it seems by the feet of foam. Like we talked about before, grafted just means attached, right? It means you are connected or a part of something. So if we have a look at the options, we want to see that the surfaces are attached to something, right? So if we have a look at A, acting in unison, this just means acting as one. And this is not what the word grafted is suggesting, so we know A is not correct. B, now a part of a wave. So like we talked about before, it's talking about how it's grafted to the foam. So the foam, talking about the waves, when they crash each other, we can see foam in the water, especially at the beach. So this is what we're talking about. So B would be our best answer. But let's just, like we did before, double check C and D is not our answer. So C, struggling with their boards. We don't see any sign of struggle in this passage, right? Rather, the fact that they are able to balance so well and surf so well along with the water. And grafting is not talking about struggling with their boards. So C is not our answer. And D, at the wave's highest point, like we talked about before, because grafted means attached. D is not our answer. Moving on to question 12. Unlike the rest of the poem, in the last verse, surfers what? So we already discussed this, right, when we were talking about the poem. So throughout the whole poem, they're talking, the poet is describing the surfers with descriptions that aren't usually used to describe people, right? Rather, trying to describe the movements of the surfers very majestically. But towards the end, we're actually seeing behaviors of people and things that people actually do by using words like paddle and splash and swim. And through this, they are able to describe these surfers as normal people, right? Unlike what the poet talked about earlier. So having a look, A are shown to be surprisingly cautious. We know that the words paddle and swim, we weren't talking about cautiousness, not talking about being careful. And cautious means careful. B, appear unconcerned with looking impressive. This isn't what we're talking about either, right? So unconcerned just means not really caring about looking impressive, even though the poet did discuss the surfers as being very impressive. There's nothing to hint that they appear unconcerned about that particular aspect. So we know B is not correct. C are described as behaving like ordinary people. So this would be correct, like we talked about earlier. So like ordinary people swim, and they splash, right? Splash each other. And this is what we saw in the passage. So we know that C is our answer. But let's talk about D as well, just to confirm. D seems to be sensing a big opportunity. So, in the last verse, we are not talking about that any big opportunity, rather, like we talked about earlier, how they're behaving like normal people by swimming and splashing. So we can confirm C is our answer. Question 13. In which verse does the climax of the poem occur? So climax is likely, when they're surfing, right? When they start surfing fast and rapidly, right? So if we have a look at each of the verses, let's see, we're looking at verse 5, 6, and 7, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So let's see. Verse 5 starts here. It says, late as they can. This is 5, 6, 7, and 8. So let's have a look at each one by one. So 5, it says, late as they can, they slice the face. In time possession, balances triumph in this place. Triumph possession. So this is hinting that they are actually starting to surf, right? So they are slicing the face of the water, which is a term used to describe surfers in what they do. In time possession, with precision, like a machine, like we talked about earlier, and it's greatly important that they are balanced. So we can see that standard 5 would actually be the climax. But let's just see 6, 7, and 8 as well. I think we can already just take off 8 because, like we talked about earlier, this wouldn't really be the climax, rather the ending of the poem where they're kind of settling down, coming out of the water, acting like ordinary people, like we talked about earlier. So we know 8 isn't the answer. So let's just cross that out. Let's go back to 6. The mindless heave of which they rode, a fluid shelf, breaks as they leave it, slow, falls, and slowed. So falls and slowed, and it says breaks as they leave it. This wouldn't really be the climax. It would rather be the end of the climax and what's actually happening. The wave is falling, it's slowing down. So this isn't, these aren't words that are used when we're talking about the climax. So we know 6 wouldn't be the answer. And stanza and verse 7, clear the sheep body, sleek as seal, loosen and tingle, and by the board, the barefoot feels the shock of shingle. So like we talked about earlier, the stanza is talking about and explaining how the surfers look. And this wouldn't really be the climax, right? Because it's just lots of description on what's happening. So we can confirm that question 13 would be A. Cool. And lastly, with question 14, what is the main idea developed in this poem? So the main idea, you guys want to think about what we were reading in the poem. So it was about the surfers, right? So let's have a look at all the options and see what is our best answer. A, the efforts involved in developing a physical skill, right? So this one, although we are kind of talking about effort, it seems like we are putting in lots of effort. It's not really the main idea, right? Developing a physical skill, which could be surfing, but it could be correct actually. So let's just give it a little question mark in front. But it's not our best answer, right? You guys can probably think, there could be a better answer coming along the way. So let's have a look at B, the sense of letdown after a major achievement. So we know that there was no sense of letdown, right? Letdown just means getting disappointed, right? So we know that there was no disappointment. And so look at C, the achievements possible when people work together. We know that there wasn't much about, there was no ideas of teamwork, right? It says work together. So we know that there were no ideas of teamwork. Although it seems like they were achieving lots, this wasn't really the main idea that was discussed and was developed in this poem. So we know C is incorrect. And lastly, D, the mastery of humans over the power of nature. So mastery means authority and superiority. This means they have lots of, authority, they have power over the power of nature, right? And if we think about it, the power of nature, we're just talking about how surfers, which are the humans, were able to control themselves amongst intense and strong waves, right? So, which is just indicating nature, right? So this would be our best answer because the whole passage was, talking about how humans were able to control themselves, stay balanced amongst the powerful waves. If we saw here, balance is triumph, and they were poising their weights, with learned skills, and they're imitating the wave. And even though the nature could seem so powerful, they were able to, have power over that and have mastery over that. With authority. That's why D would be our best answer. So question 14 is D. So I'm hoping you guys learned that even though in question 14, especially in question 14, we saw there are different different answers that could have been correct with reading comprehension and with maths and thinking skills as well. There sometimes are, two answers that could be correct, but one is actually a lot better and one is a more correct answer. So we want to make sure we are checking to see if there are other answers that could be correct and that could be the best. So the next set of our reading comprehension questions consist of 6 paragraphs. And with these type of questions, you just want to read each paragraph carefully and pick which option summarizes each paragraph best. So with these questions, what I like to do is I like to have a read of the options first to see what I'll be working with and to get an idea of what I should be looking for, and to go back to the extracts individually, read them, summarize them in my head, and go back to the options and choose which one I think is best. So let's have a go at doing that, but we'll obviously be reading it together. So having a look at the options, I'll just read them out loud. So A says Mars entering 20th century popular culture. B, how new technology facilitated the earliest scientific observation of Mars. C, recent evidence for the presence of water on Mars. D, the idea that there are different perceptions of the planet Mars. E, the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in movies and books. F, an assumption about the geographical feature on Mars that was inaccurate. And G, the significance of Mars to earlier human societies. All right, so let's have a look at our first extract for question 15. Let's read it together. And all these extracts will be on the topic of our fascination with Mars. Mars, the fourth most distant planet from our sun in our solar system, is actually more than one place. There is the Mars that scientists study through telescopes and with robotic satellites and rovers, the destination in our solar system that astronauts will someday visit and colonize. There are also other versions of Mars which have come from our imagination throughout the course of history. So this extract is talking to us about the fact that Mars is actually more than one place, and there are different ideas of Mars for different perspectives. So we know that there's a Mars that scientists study through telescopes and with robotic satellites. And satellites are just machines that orbit stars or planets. And there's also other versions of Mars that have come from our imagination, and the astronauts will visit someday and possibly colonize, which means take over, right? And if we go back to the options, let's have a look at let's have a read of all the options and see which one fits us best. Mars entering 20th century popular culture, we know that this has nothing to do with it. B, how new technology facilitated the early scientific observation of Mars. We know that this wasn't mentioned either. C, recent evidence for the presence of water on Mars. There was nothing about water on Mars. D, the idea that there are different perceptions of the planet Mars. Well, this is correct because they were talking about how the different perceptions were our imagination as well as scientists and astronauts. So D could be our answer, but let's make sure E, F, and G aren't correct. E, the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in movies and books. There was nothing to do with movies and books, so we know E is not correct. F, an assumption about a geographical feature on Mars that was inaccurate. There was nothing about accuracy in this text, so we know F is not correct either. And G, the significance of Mars to earlier human societies. There's nothing to do with earlier, the earliest version to the significance of Mars on earlier societies, even though they were talking about history, it was nothing to do with G. So we know that D is our correct answer. And what I like to do is I just like to cross D out to make sure, just to limit our options for our later paragraphs. But I do like to read it just to make sure I haven't made any silly mistakes. Let's have a look at question 16. Mars is one of 5 planets which are visible to the unaided eye, which means, without a telescope. Its reddish-orange hue inspired some civilizations in the past to imagine it as a symbol of war and violence. The ancient Mesopotamians linked Mars to Nergal, a god who was a symbol of hunting, and sometimes led other gods to battle. In their city of Nineveh, they erected the Nergal Gate to show their reverence. The ancient Greek associated the red planet with Ares, the warrior god, who was the son of Zeus and his wife Hera. In Roman mythology, Ares became the war god Mars, who was so important to them they dedicated March, the first month in the calendar year, to him. So if you guys do remember the options, I can see that you should have a bit of an idea on what the option should be. So this extract is talking to us about the impact on Mars in the Roman mythology. So the Roman mythology is basically myths and stories of like ancient gods and goddesses to describe different social values. And this was made up by the Romans a long time ago. So let's have a look at the options. A, Mars entering 20th century popular culture. We know A is not correct. B, how new technology facilitated the earlier scientific observation on Mars. There was nothing to do with technology, so we know B is incorrect. C, recent evidence for the presence of water on Mars. We know this isn't correct either. Having a brief read of D, we know D can't be correct as well. E, the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in movies and books. There was nothing to do with movies and books. F, an assumption about a geographical feature on Mars that was inaccurate. Not this either. And G, the significance of Mars to earlier human societies would be correct because Roman mythology was written a long time ago, which is indicating earlier human societies. And this would be our best answer. So let's just write G down. Cool. Moving on to question 17. Eventually, people started shifting from thinking of Mars as a mystical place to seeing it as a planet that was somewhat like their own. The development of telescopes in the 1600s enabled humans to see Mars and some of the details of its surface clearly for the first time. In 1659, the Dutch astronomer Christian Huygens drew one of the first accurate maps of the red planet and figured out that it rotated in the same way that Earth did. So in this, with this, we're talking about in the 1600s, how Christian Huygens drew one of the first accurate maps of the red planet. So this is talking about an early discovery. So let's go back to the options and see which one could be correct. We forgot to cross G out, so let's have a look. A, Mars entering 20th century popular culture. We know this isn't correct. B, how new technology facilitated the earliest scientific observation of Mars. This seems to be true because the technology we're talking about is the telescope, the development of telescopes in the 1600s, which is quite early. So let's just write that down and see if any of the options could be this one. C, recent evidence for the presence of water on Mars. There was nothing to do with water. E, the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in movies and books. There was nothing to do with movies and books, so we know E is incorrect. F, an assumption about a geographical feature on Mars that was inaccurate. So we know there was nothing to do with accuracy, rather a early scientific finding by Christian Huygens regarding the telescope. So we can confirm that B is our answer. Moving on to question 18, let's have a quick read. In 1877, the Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli observed lines in the planet equatorial region, a phenomenon that also was noted by the American astronomer Percival Lowell. The term that Schiaparelli used, canelli, sounded a lot like the English word canal, and that led some to mistakenly think that the red planet had waterways built in an alien civilization. All right, so we know that in this extract, they're talking about how an Italian astronomer observed lines in the planet's equatorial, which is basically means close to the equator or close to the center of the Earth. And they were able to, and it led people to mistakenly think that the red planet had waterways built in it by an alien civilization, which is very interesting. All right, so let's have a look at the options. So we forgot to cross out B, so let's just do that. So A, Mars entering 20th century popular culture. We know that this isn't covered, so A is not correct. C, recent evidence for the presence of water on Mars. We know that waterways was mentioned, but it wasn't really to do with evidence for the presence of Mars. It was rather that people mistakenly thought that the red planet had waterways built by an alien civilization, and it wasn't evidence. So we know C cannot be correct. E, the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in movies and books. We know that this isn't correct either, because there was no mention of movies and books. And F, an assumption about the geographical feature on Mars that was inaccurate. So inaccurate just means, it wasn't correct. And like we read earlier, some people mistakenly thought that the red planet had waterways. So F would be our best answer. So we can just write that down. So let's just have a, moving on, let's have a read of question 19, or extract 19. Even after other scientists concluded that that Mars' surface was probably not capable of supporting life, the idea of life on Mars fascinated people's imaginations. Writers of the new genre of science fiction and fantasy began to write about it in their stories. British author H.G. Wells' pioneering novel, The War of the Worlds, depicted Mars as a dying planet whose technologically advanced civilization wanted to conquer Earth. It caused a sensation when adapted for a radio broadcast in 1938. Martian Chronicles, Ray Bradbury's 1950 collection of stories, presented a planet filled with empty cities from a fallen civilization. For Hollywood filmmakers, Mars also became a convenient setting for movies full of malevolent Martians and monsters, such as the 1960 film The Angry Red Planet. There was even a television sitcom, My Favorite Martian, which featured our sarcastic secret visitor from Mars who pretended to be human. All right, so this extract is talking to us about books and movies that was inspired by Mars. And if you guys remember the options, I think we should have a bit of an idea on what the answer should be. So let's read the options left over. E, Mars entering 20th century popular culture. We know that this should be correct because the popular culture is just portraying movies and books. But if we have a look at E, it says the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in movies and books. They weren't really talking about the reason why it was featured, it was portrayed more realistically, rather the fact that Mars was slowly regaining, the idea of Mars in movies and books was slowly gaining popularity in the cultures. And also one more thing is 1950 just means 20th century is the 1900s, right? Just like the 21st century is 2000, so the year that we're living in at right now. So in this case, A would be the most correct, even though E does sound a little bit, could be the right answer. It wasn't to do with how, it wasn't about the reason why Mars began to be more portrayed, rather the fact that Mars was just entering the popular culture in the 20th century. And let's have a look at our last text, question 20. All these sci-fi fantasies of Mars were dashed by the close-up images transmitted by the Mariner 4 unmanned space probe in 1964, which revealed it to be cratered moon-like planet, lacking in seas or vegetation. Those and latest scientific discoveries about Mars seem to have influenced writers and filmmakers to change the depiction of the red planet, not as homes to an alien civilization, but a distant world that humans will someday visit and colonize. In more recent movies, such as the 1990s Total Recall and The Martian in 2015, Mars is depicted as a rugged, barren, dry planet with thin atmosphere where space colonists have live in well-protected bases and wear spacesuits to survive. All right, so this extract is very similar to extract 19, the extract in question 19, in the sense that it is talking about movies as well. However, it is talking about the reason why Mars began to get a bit more, began to be portrayed a bit more in movies and books realistically because of a close-up image that was shown in 1964, and thanks to that, it is able to be portrayed more realistically. So if we remember option E, just cross out option A for question 19. If we have a look at option E, it says the reason why Mars began to be portrayed more realistically in books and movies would be the best answer, because this is what we just talked about, right? So we can confirm E is our answer right here. The realistic close-up images that we were able to see. And as you guys may have realized, C does not have C is not an answer for any of the extracts. They do this to confuse you guys and to trick you. However, you know, making sure that you read everything carefully will help you eliminate the extra option. Okay, so the last extract that we'll be reading in the last section of our reading comprehension exams will be going through 4 extracts below on the theme of heroes. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to read each of the extracts on the theme of heroes and be able to differentiate each of the extracts from each other and go back to the questions and answer them accordingly. So what I like to do personally is I like to read the questions first to give myself a bit of an idea on what's going on, and then move down to the extracts one by one. So extract A, read it and summarize it in my head, or write down little dot points to remind myself of what was going on, and do that for extract B, C, and D, and then go back to the questions and answer them. So that is one option and one method that you can use when you're answering these type of questions. But another type that you can use is what I like to suggest to my year 5s and 6s that will be sitting the selective test soon, is because in the selective test we are restricted for time, we might find ourselves running out of time at the end. Even though it's not ideal that we run out of time, it is a very possible scenario. So what you could do is you can read extract A. So you can read the questions or not, it's up to you, but you can read extract A, summarize it in your head, and go to the questions and see which one of these questions apply to extract A. And then if you still have time, go down to extract B, read extract B, and go back to the questions and see which ones apply for extract B. And in that case, even if you have time left, if you have a little bit of time left over, you can just guess the remaining C or guess the remaining D to increase your chances of getting those correct. And in that situation, you will be able to kind of filter out the questions that are correct for B, A, and B, and just guess the remaining. So that's just an option that you may use if you'd like. If you find that it works for you, that would be great. But for me personally, I like to just make sure I read all 4 extracts in order for me to differentiate each one from each other. So when I'm answering the question, I could be a bit more precise. But the second option could be ideal for someone that runs out of time in a test. So just keeping that in mind, let's have a go at the questions. So question 21. So like I said, let's just have a brief read to give us an idea on what we should be looking for. So question 21, which writer is a research scientist? 22, which writer gives an indication that they know the hero mentioned? 23, which writer is of the opinion that we are wrong to see certain people as heroes? 24, which writer refers to the heroic act to illustrate a particular interpretation of what heroism is? 25, which writer observes a connection between a past hero and our human capabilities today? Question 26, which writer mentions something a hero does which suddenly lightens the writer's mood? 25, which writer refers to an attempt to help ordinary people act in a more selfless way? 28, which writer uses mocking humor when giving a view about today's heroes? 29, which writer invites readers to think about a common example of societies putting great values on heroes? And 30, which writer provides a detail which is a reminder of the hero's wider struggle? All right, so after having a look at these questions, you should have a brief idea on what we will be reading today. So let's have a look at extract A. Let's read it together and kind of give ourselves a little summary. Okay, so extract A. It took less than 50 seconds, 49.11 seconds to be exact, for Kathy Freeman to run into immortality. 49.11 seconds in 200 years. I was there in the Sydney Olympic Stadium on that cool evening. September 25th, 2000. Me and 112,000 others, watching this one slight girl carry the hopes of an entire nation. I so wanted to feel what others were feeling, but something inside felt so empty. I knew for a fact that there was the same aching in Kathy's own soul, the same feeling of being Australian, yet knowing the full cost of that allegiance. We had never talked about it. We had no need. It is something we share, Aboriginal people, an unspoken bond, the memories of lives on the outside looking in. This moment was bigger than sport. It was about history, about healing, about reconciliation. But no, I wanted Kathy to run for all other people who had never had a chance, for all those who are still outside looking in. As she took her victory lap, Kathy ran with two flags, the Australian flag with its steps to Britain, and the red, black, and yellow Aboriginal flag that honours the earth and the sun and the people. And there, in that moment, I could let go. I could be Australian and stand with other Australians. But you cannot erase 2 centuries in 49.11 seconds, when Kathy Freeman stood smiling on the medal dais. An Aboriginal expert outside the stadium told the story of the ongoing battle for justice. Okay, so this extract, as we just read, is about Kathy Freeman. And she is a famous lady who was, she was the first person to win the Olympics as an Olympic medal as an Australian Aboriginal person, or Indigenous Australian person. So let's have a look at each of these paragraphs to make sure we understand. So we know that it starts off by saying it took less than 50 seconds for Kathy to run into immortality. So immortality just basically means eternal life, which obviously would be a metaphor because someone actually can't be immortal. But we can see that this is symbolizing something that we'll be kind of looking on from now, reading along. We know that she was watched by lots of people, and she was the hope of an entire nation, which would just symbolize the Indigenous Australians. This is most likely because everyone knew that she was obviously in the running for the gold medal, and for her to win a gold medal at the Olympics would be a great sign for Australians, Indigenous Australians, and to kind of create a sense of justice and a bit of equality, and sharing these goals would be quite great for everyone. Right, let's keep reading along. So we know that, moving on, it says, so I wanted to feel what others were feeling, but something inside felt so empty. So this is talking about, it's got some negative feelings. But I'm just imagining that the persona would be feeling quite nervous, so was all the other people that were watching, because they all wanted her to win. And keep reading. We can see that it says, I knew for a fact that there was the same aching in Kathy's own soul. So that kind of sense of nervousness and the same feeling of being Australian, yet knowing the full cost of your allegiance. And allegiance just means support and loyalty. And it says, we never talked about it before. We have no need. It is something we share, Aboriginal people, an unspoken bond, the memories of the outside, of the lives outside looking in. So this would just kind of symbolize that Kathy Freeman had a voice for many people. And moving on to the next paragraph, they were talking about how she, it's continuing on from what we just talked about. She had a voice in order for everyone to heal, for the reconciliation after the British people, took over Australia. So in this paragraph, we're kind of looking at the importance of Kathy Freeman winning Olympics. You guys can probably imagine, guess why it is so important, like we talked about earlier. And we go on to see that she ended up winning the race. She took a victory lap, and she ran with 2 flags, which kind of shows unity, right? And even though those two, that moment of victory cannot erase 2 centuries of, I guess, suppression that Indigenous Australians could have felt for the past 200 years, it was still giving us a bit of hope on the sense of healing, reconciliation, and changing history. Cool. So let's move on to extract B. This will also be about heroes, but as we can see here in extract A, this was about the author's own hero, the persona's own hero, who is Kathy Freeman. Right, so let's move on to extract B and have a read and talk about it together. Right. Just look at the plethora of heroes in movies these days, and you can see how much we all love heroes. What makes certain people take heroic actions in the face of great danger? I don't feel like I did something something spectacular. I just saw someone who needed help. I did what I felt was right. Wesley Autry told US journalists after an incident in which he rescued a man who had fallen onto a train track. True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost, said Arthur Ashe, a professional tennis player. According to the Heroic Imagination Project, a non-profit organization that focuses on teaching people to become heroes in their everyday lives, heroism involves a behavior or action on behalf of another person for a moral cause. All right, so we can see that in this extract, this is just, we can see it's quite informative, because the first section is giving us an example of an ordinary hero, who just happened to see someone that needed help and did whatever they felt was right. And they're talking about how, usually heroes in movies are quite, are doing lots of heroic actions, like lots of dramatic actions. But this paragraph is just hinting to us that an example of being an ordinary hero is doing something that would be helpful for others. Right, moving on to the next paragraph, we can see it says, true heroism is remarkably sober and undramatic. Sober just means, it's something that's sensible and serious, unlike what we see in movies. And undramatic obviously just means it's not dramatic and it's not exaggerated. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost. So it's not an urge to be better than others, but an urge to serve others whatever cost. And this was said by a professional player. So this is just basically an interpretation of what heroism is. Heroism is. And this is just compared to movies. All right, and lastly, the last paragraph, it says, according to Hero Imagination Project, they are teaching others to become heroes in their everyday lives. And heroism involves a behavior or action on behalf of another person or for a moral cause. And this is just showing how and a way to show heroism is just by doing kind things in everyday lives. And there's a non-profit organization that kind of encourages that. Cool. All right, so let's move on to extract C. And this is another extract we'll be looking at regarding the theme of heroes. So let's read this together and talk about it as well. These days, many people look up to celebrities, like actors, sports stars, or musicians as their heroes and role models. We now have a means to follow their lives and thoughts on social media, and this is serious. In fact, to my mind, one of the most horrific developments of our century has been the widespread acceptance of the notion that if someone is good at acting, sports, pop music, this means the rest of us should listen to their opinion on climate change or politics. If I hear an actor critiquing a film or a play, or telling me why a certain script is a work of genius, of course I'm interested. I might learn something. As it happens, I care about animal rights, but I'm not sure why I'm supposed to find the plight of animals any more or less poignant just because a movie star has given them a voice. Of course, many of these stars would say this is terribly mean-spirited. That just means, that they're just getting the message out to the public who lack awareness, that they're just using their platform to do some good. I sort of get this, but I don't really buy it. Right, so this extract, as you can see, is quite interesting because it's talking about how some people look up to celebrities as heroes, but the author and the persona doesn't really buy it. And they're saying they're using their voice in a way that shouldn't be used as. So let's have a look at each of these paragraphs one by one and talk about it. So we can see at the start, this section is just talking about the fact that celebrities are perceived as heroes. And moving on, it says, we now have the means to follow their lives and thoughts on social media, and this is serious. Now, serious usually isn't quite a positive connotation, but let's move on. In fact, to my mind, one of the most horrific developments, horrific just means, terrifying, right? It's terrible, something terrifying development for our century, and has been a widespread acceptance of the notion that if someone is good at acting, or other things, it means the rest of us should listen to their opinions on climate change or politics. It's quite interesting. So this paragraph we can see here is just, it's a bit of criticism, right, on how we shouldn't use celebrities as heroes. And although this paragraph isn't particularly saying that, it is hinting at the fact that maybe we shouldn't, right? Moving on to the next paragraph, we can see that it's using quite a bit of they're trying to be quite sarcastic, right? Because they're saying if the persona hears an actor critiquing a film or doing something that they are actually good at, the author would be interested. But if they start talking about animal rights or politics or something that is completely irrelevant to what they are actually good at, the persona isn't really going to believe it, right? So in this section, we can see a bit of hints of sarcasm or even critiquing criticism, right? And if we have a look at the last sentence, it says, I care about animal rights, but I'm not sure why I'm specifying the plight, plight of animals, which just means unfortunate situations of animals, any more or less poignant. Poignant, which just means sad. Right? Just because a movie star has given them a voice. And moving on to the last paragraph, it says, it's talking about how many of these stars would say this is terribly mean-spirited because the author seemed to be very, very truthful. He's just saying what he feels, right? He doesn't really seem to be considerate of what others could think. But it just means that they're using their platforms to do some sort of good. I sort of get this, but I don't really buy it. So we can see that at the end, the persona is giving us a bit of a personal opinion, as well as just wrapping up and saying, this isn't really what celebrities should be doing. Cool. Moving on to our last extract. We'll have a read together and then we'll go back to the questions and answer them. I love the Thundercats superhero cartoon as a child, watching cat-like humanoids fighting the force of evil. Whenever their leader was in trouble, he'd unleash the Sword of Omens to gain sight beyond sight, the ability to see events happening at a faraway places or below Thundercats, who to instantaneously summon his allies to his location. What kid didn't want those superpowers? A few months ago, my childhood dreams were at once destroyed and fulfilled. Standing in a line, I noticed that everyone was focused on their smartphone screens. Suddenly, it hit me. I already had Sword of Omen superpowers. With my smartphone, I can see a video of a faraway event and text my friends to meet up. Billions of people now have what used to be considered superpowers. The physical superpowers may not be too far behind. I'm working on them in the Center for Rehabilitation Engineering, Assistive Technology at Vanderbilt University. Humanity has begun to enter an age of wearable exoskeletons and exosuits that offer support and strength to the bodies of those who have been weakened. Cool. So this last extract is telling us about, giving us a bit of insight on the persona's childhood superhero who was able to, have abilities to see events far away and to summon his allies, which just means call his allies or call his teammates. I guess that could be another way of saying it. Teammates to his location, and they're saying, what kid didn't want those superpowers? And so this is just talking about the childhood hero. And moving on, it says, a few months ago, my childhood dreams were once destroyed and fulfilled. So destroyed just means it's been ruined, right? And fulfilled means it's been satisfied. So we can see that there's a bit of contrast going on with these two words because these two just mean the complete opposite, right? So there's a bit of contrast. However, he goes on to explain what this means. So standing in line, the persona realized that everyone was so focused on their smartphone screens, which is, with the smartphone, you can see faraway events, which the persona was talking about earlier, and text my friends to meet up, which just basically means summon his allies to his location. So this is quite ironic to see, because he was saying that his everyone does have superhero powers now, which is kind of talking about the fulfilled section. Right? And the persona moves on to talk about how physical superpowers may not be too far behind either, because the persona seems to work at an engineering technology faculty at a university, and humanity is entering an age of wearable skeletons and exosuits. Just basically means, support for people that have been weakened. And exoskeletons and exosuits are basically things that support the body on the outside. So it might be, a poor example would be crutches, but if you have a look at pictures of them, it's just basically like armor that goes all around your body and that help people that have been weakened. So we can see that this extract is giving us a bit of information on, someone's childhood past hero and how humanity is kind of evolving to meet those heroes, meet what they were able to do and do what they were able to do. Cool. So now that we've talked about all these extracts, let's have a go at the questions together. All right, so we have already read them prior to this, but we'll make sure to have a go at them one by one. So question 21 says, which writer is a research scientist? So we know that none of the extracts really mention a research scientist, rather someone that is working on something at a university with rehabilitation engineering, right? And engineering usually refers to scientists. So we would say question 21 would best be supported by D. Question 22, which writer gives an indication that they know a hero mentioned? So that they know the hero mentioned. So in this particular, in these extracts, there was no particular hero that had been named or that had been particularly mentioned with a name, except for in extract A, when she was talking about, or when the persona was talking about Kathy Freeman. And seems to be that the persona knows this hero very well, not personally, but as someone that they look up to. So A would be the best answer. An indication just means, what gives an idea that they know the hero mentioned. Question 23. Which writer is of the opinion that we are wrong to see certain people as heroes? If you guys remember we are wrong to see certain people as heroes. If you guys remember in extract C, they were talking about how some celebrities don't use their platform very well and shouldn't be looked up as heroes, right? As we saw in this passage. And they were using words like horrific development of the century, that if they're good at something and they are famous for it, that we should listen to them. But the persona is completely disagreeing with this, which we can see here. That we are wrong to see certain people, which were celebrities, as heroes. So we can see that question 23 would be best described in C. Cool. Moving on to question 24. It says, which writer refers to a heroic act to illustrate a particular interpretation of what heroism is? So if you guys remember, the particular interpretation of heroism and illustrate just means showing. So a particular interpretation. If you have a look at extract B, if you guys remember that the act of heroism is actually quite ordinary. They were talking about how, if you guys remember here, there was an interpretation of what the persona thought heroism was, which is, doing something when you see someone needing help or just offering help, and involving being heroes, acting like heroes in our everyday lives. So if you guys would agree, question 24 would be best supported with B. Question 25, which writer observes a connection between a past hero and our human capabilities today? And if you guys remember in extract D, they were talking about how this is a past hero of Thundercats, a superheroes cartoon, and how humans are able to kind of humans are capable of showing these superhero actions right now. So by looking at phones, calling your allies or friends, and being able to see events that are happening all over the world. Also to do with the fact that we are entering an age where there are wearable exoskeletons and exosuits to offer support and strength to bodies that have been weakened. So question 25 would be D. Question 26, which writer mentions something a hero does which suddenly lightens the writer's mood? So in here, we're looking for something that, possibly they were in a bad mood or even a worse mood and it suddenly gets better, or it was already good and it gets even better, right? So something like that. And if you guys think about it, in extract A, we were shown how Kathy Freeman had won the gold medal, and people were very happy, right? And if you remember at the first section, you can see that the author was feeling something, felt something inside being so empty, felt so empty, and then she goes on, or the persona goes on to say that it was, the moment was bigger than sport, and it was all about history, and the persona could finally let go. In that moment, I could let go, which just, hints at feeling liberated or feeling freed. And this would be a hint of being enlightened. That's why question 16 would be A. Question 27. Which writer refers to an attempt to help ordinary people act in a more selfless way? You guys remember, ordinary just means normal, right? And in a more selfless way, be to help people, without putting themselves first. And having a look at these extracts, we can see that in extract B, that there was ordinary people or normal people that would just help people in need. That needed help in the moment. And it also mentioned a non-profit organization that really encourages this behavior. And through exploring these points, we can see that question 27 would be best supported by B. Question 28. Which writer uses mocking humor when giving a view about today's heroes? So we know that in extract A, there was no mocking humor, or B, B was quite informative. But if you guys remember C, they were the author seemed to be quite criticizing about how people today are viewing celebrities as heroes when they shouldn't. And also we can see that in the second paragraph of this passage, we saw hints of sarcasm, which also kind of relate to mocking humor. Mocking is just, making fun of something or just really disagreeing with that particular behavior in a cruel way, in not a great way. And you can see in the last paragraph, the author does admit that, saying that this could be quite terribly mean-spirited, but doesn't really mind because they're just saying what they want, what they thought. So we can see that question 28 would be C. And moving on to question 29, which writer invites readers to think about a common example of society putting great values on heroes? So we're talking about how it invites readers to think about. So it's not really explicitly saying a common example of society putting on great values, rather suggesting this particular idea. And if we remember extract B, they were talking about how society, which is a particular section of society, which is a non-profit organization, focuses on teaching people to become heroes in their everyday lives, which is basically talking about a great value on heroes, right? So, having read that, we can see that question 19 would be better supported as B. Even though extract A kind of visits the idea of society putting ideas and values on a particular hero called Kathy Freeman, we would think that extract B covers this the best because it is inviting readers to think about the common example of society, put on great values on heroes, which is basically saying, it is showing and kind of encouraging everyone to become a hero themselves in society. Cool. And lastly, with question 30, which writer provides a detail which is a reminder of the hero's wider struggle? So in this case, the only struggle that we saw in particular was in A and C, right? A was talking about the hero's struggle in terms of being able to win the gold medal, win a medal at the Olympics, and kind of show that there is unity and there was healing and reconciliation involved. And C was talking about not really a struggle, but rather a criticism and something that they completely disagreed with, which I guess isn't really a struggle, right? It's just rather a disagreement, which is why question 30 would be A. Also, we can see that because they're providing detail, which is a reminder of a hero's wider struggle. The reminder would be on how, the suppression of that Indigenous Australians could have felt while they were, before this race, and how through this race they're able to show unity and support towards each other. So we can see, we can confirm that question 30 is A.